All right, class, welcome to week 12. Today we're going to get into Homo habilis and Homo erectus mostly, which are the two preliminary uh, ancestors that we will be talking about in the Homo branch. So in terms of important discoveries, again, Darwin, 1871, proposed that humans had evolved in Africa based on similarities between humans and great apes. And then you had Ernest Haeckel. This is going to become a major debate within the field. Believed that humans were most closely related to orangutans in Asia, and proposed that humans were actually of Asian ancestry. Now, what we get here is essentially um, some of the precursors to the out of Africa theory and multi-regional. Dubois is convinced that he needs to find fossil evidence, and he moves to the Dutch East Indies and he finds Java man, which is a Homo erectus on the island of Java. So the Leakeys go to Africa because they believe Darwin. And they believe that the kind of cradle of humanity was actually in the Olduvai Gorge. And they actually find evidence of Homo habilis, who is the precursor to Homo erectus, in 1960. And essentially, Homo habilis lives between 2.5 million years ago and 1.0 million years ago, and lived side by side with other Australopithecines. So this is where you have kind of convergence into the Homo branch, but also you have the other Australopithecines hanging out in this part of Africa as well. The Homo line relies on more tools and technology rather than our bodies and our mouths. Habilis is found in Tanzania, Kenya, Ethiopia, Malawi, and South Africa, and has the same distribution as contemporary Australopithecines. So this is an interesting ancestor that essentially was pretty varied around Africa itself. Homo habilis actually never gets outside of Africa, though. So even though Dubois found erectus in Asia, this is essentially not where habilis gets to. Habilis is only confined to Africa. Homo rudolfensis is another one that is related to habilis, is a little bigger than habilis, but had the same similar body morphology. So rudolfensis is kind of, some people group it in with habilis, some people group it in with erectus, some people split it and call it its own. Most in the field split it and call it its own species at this point. Homo habilis had a smaller chewing complex than the robust Australopithecines, but a larger brain and rounded appearance. So this is why habilis is part of the Homo branch. Is essentially their teeth are more like ours. They're also, again, going to be more omnivore, based out of maybe not hunting, but scavenging. And their brain is bigger as well, is bigger than the Australopithecines. So Tim White proposes that Australopithecines, like Gari, was the actual ancestor of habilis. And again, this was talked about in last week's material. Habilis walked bipedally, but was shorter in stature. Habilis is Homo habilis basically means handy human. And then again, the shortness of habilis helps connect them to Australopithecines and that kind of evolutionary line. The changes in teeth give us evidence of tool use. So their teeth are changing. They're not as robust as some of the chewing complexes in Australopithecines that were relying on heavy grains, seeds, and plant material. They still would have eaten those things, but they're going to start to move towards more meat eating as well. Shifts in the weather and natural resources force adaptations of habilis, which ends up being an advantage for habilis, as tools were adapted to add to dietary flexibility, like digging up tubers and also eating meat products. The tool complex, and this is a giant hint for Homo habilis, is called Oldowan. The Oldowan complex is associated with what the Leakeys discover when they discover habilis in the Olduvai Gorge, and they also discover tool use with them as well. Homo erectus, 1.8 to 300,000 years ago. They've pushed Homo erectus back to 2. Some people even say 2.2. So you're going to have habilis around 2.5, and then you have kind of this divergent line that is Homo erectus at about 2.2. 1.8 is kind of a solid number that people use, but this has been backed up definitely to 2 million years ago. Fossils of Homo erectus, which is fascinating, are found in, again, Asia. Dubois finds evidence of Homo erectus on the island of Java in Indonesia. So Asia, Europe, and Africa are all associated with Homo erectus. Essentially, Homo erectus is our first, that we know of, ancestor that gets out of Africa and really spreads around kind of the old world. Lake Turkana in Africa is the oldest find, 80% of a juvenile skeleton. There's a video that goes into Turkana Boy. It is very extensive, so you'll learn a lot more about that individual as well. They had short arms and long legs, and they could have grown, and some evidence is that they would have been as tall as 6.5 feet, which is taller height than us. They had a modern striding gait, but their hands, their palms faced out, and your video also goes into this too. Their shoulders weren't able to throw things like we are. So there's different shoulder complex there with erectus. Variations on Homo erectus are based on their location. They change depending on environment associated with Europe, Asia, and Africa. And I will say that Homo erectus, some groups of them essentially evolved or changed and morphed over time into who we call Neanderthal. Because Neanderthal actually did not evolve separately in Africa and then get out and go to these other places. What should be noted here is that Homo erectus the earliest finds of Homo erectus are in Africa. They are not in Asia, like some of the early theorists thought. So essentially Darwin's theory on humans evolving in Africa is correct thus far, although that picture is getting more complicated with different groups breeding with each other and then kind of creating different human groups out of that. And we'll get into that as we move on through the weeks. Tim White discovered cut marks on the cheekbone of erectus, and this led him to think of ritual cutting or cannibalism. Again, a lot of anthropologists and a lot of lay people go to cannibalism. This could have also been what we call in the field endocannibalism, where if your ancestors die, you essentially consume some of their body or brain to essentially have that spirit or essence with you throughout life. So that cutting could have simply been, it could have been an example of Homo erectus actually starving and needing to use cannibalism, or it could have been evidence of endocannibalism. So in Asia, we find Homo erectus at 1.8 million years ago to 300,000 years ago. And again, this is where you're going to see some crossover where Homo erectus would have definitely overlapped with Homo neanderthalensis and even possibly populations of Homo sapiens. One of the hints here is that Homo erectus has a sagittal keel, which is a bone ridge on the top of their skull. And it's along the sagittal suture of the cranium. And you can see that in this picture here. It goes right down the middle from kind of the middle of the eyebrow all the way down the back of the skull, kind of like a mohawk version of a bone. Dmanisi, Homo erectus from the Republic of Georgia, evidence of tuberculosis. So we're starting to get evidence of disease. There's also evidence of in Turkana Boy and one of these sites, I think it might even be Georgia, that elders who can't even eat and don't have teeth anymore are being taken care of by the group, and this represents a big divergence in the theories around what is human. and human and empathy and those kinds of things all get wrapped up into, now they're being included into Homo erectus, which is, again, as far back as 2 million years ago. So essentially, um, human behaviors as we associate them with humanness are actually associated now with Homo erectus. And in Europe, we find them at 1.2 million years ago, to 400,000 years ago. So again, what's fascinating here is that it seems to be that they moved from Africa out into Asia, um, earlier than they even moved into Europe. But this may just be that we haven't found the fossil evidence yet. Um, so protein, from persistence hunting and scavenging added to the bump in height in Homo habilis. So originally this should say Homo erectus, not Homo habilis, sorry. Uh, Homo erectus actually originally was not as tall as they are, in the later kind of half of their existence. Um, Males increase 33% and women increase 37% in terms of height and overall size. Their brain size grows 33% as well. And the reason why this is happening is because they start to hunt and utilize more protein sources for meat. So now what happens is they become more balanced in diet. They're not just relying on specific plant foods and plant sources. They're avidly going after animals and hunting and creating hand axes and stone tools for hunting. And they would have done this hand to hand. It doesn't look like they were using spears, and they would have had a hard time throwing spears. And again, I think some of the videos cover this as well. They being intelligent becomes a selective advantage. So again, the brain size and all of those other things. Being crafty would have been part of, and we talk about selective advantage in terms of sexual selection, probably. So individuals with talents would have been preferred in terms of mating partners to those that maybe did not show signs of specific talents and or um, uh, adaptable subsistence strategies or whatnot. Um, they definitely required stone tools to hunt. They used strategic planning and tracking of animals to do this hunting. And then here's the next big hint hint. Acheulean complex is the stone tool technology of Homo erectus. And this is hand axes and sophisticated tools. They also used fire and cooking food. And this also added changes to the brain. The body didn't have to break down food as quickly. So again, a lot of those nutrients are kind of going to the brain rather than some of the intestinal areas and the teeth. And so what we have is teeth shrink over time when cooking is associated, which then brings kind of the potential for bigger brain size. It also shows that we have food sharing. So the group or the social group is not this independent, self-interested hominid groups anymore. They're much more into caring for each other in the group. All right, so that does it for this week. Again, short lectures, but it's because I have a lot of videos for you all to watch. Um, and again, these documentaries are on there. And please, we're getting closer to obviously the research paper. Many of you probably have more and more questions about that going forward. Please reach out and email me around questions around the research paper, and we will move forward as efficiently as possible. If I need to do independent one-on-one Zoom conferencing with you all, I can set those up as well. All right, great. Have a great week.